de fraîche révolution.
In 1774, Louis XVI of the Bourbon family of kings ascended the throne of France. He was 20 years old and married to the Austrian Princess Marie Antoinette. Financial crisis. Upon his accession, the new King Louis XVI found an empty treasury. This was because long years of war had drained the financial resources of France. The cost of maintaining a great court at the immense palace of Versailles. France helped the 13 American colonies to gain their independence from Britain. The war had added huge expenses. Lenders who gave the state credit began to charge 10% interest. The cost of maintaining an army and running government offices. System of the estates. French society in the 18th century was divided into 3 estates. The clergy, nobles and commoners. Peasants made up about 90% of the population. About 60% of the land was owned by nobles and the church. The members of the first 2 estates, that is, the clergy and the nobility, enjoyed certain privileges by birth. The most important of these was the exemption from paying taxes to the state. The nobles further enjoyed feudal privileges. The church too extracted its share of taxes called tithes from the peasants. And finally, all members of the third estate had to pay taxes to the state. These included a direct tax, called taille, and a number of indirect taxes which were levied on articles of everyday intake. The burden of taxes was borne by the third estate alone. The subsistence crisis. The population of France rose from about 23 million to 28 million within 75 years. This led to a rapid increase in the demand for food grains. Production of grains could not keep pace with the demand. So the price of bread rose rapidly. So the gap between the poor and the rich widened. Things became worse whenever drought or hail reduced the harvest. This led to a subsistence crisis, something that occurred frequently in France during the old regime. The middle class and the philosophers. In the past, peasants and workers had participated in revolts against increasing taxes and food scarcity. But they lacked the means to carry out full-scale methods. The 18th century witnessed the emergence of the middle class, who earned their wealth through an expanding overseas trade. All of these were educated and believed that no group in society should be privileged by birth. Rather, a person's social position must depend on his own merit. These ideas were put forward by various philosophers. In his 2 treatises of government, Locke sought to refute the doctrine of the divine and absolute right of the monarch. Rousseau carried the idea forward, proposing a form of government based on a social contract between people and their representatives. In the spirit of the laws, Charles Montesquieu proposed a division of power within the government between the legislative, the executive and the judiciary. The Estates General. In France of the old regime, the monarch did not have the power to impose taxes according to his will alone. Rather, he had to call a meeting of the Estates General which would then pass his proposals for new taxes. The Estates General was a political body to which the 3 estates sent their representatives. The first and second estates sent 300 representatives each, while 600 members of the third estate were allowed. Voting in the Estates General in the past had been conducted according to the principle that each estate had 1 vote in total. The Estates General meeting of 1789. On the 5th of May 1789, Louis XVI called together an assembly of the Estates General to pass proposals for new taxes. A resplendent hall in Versailles was prepared to host the delegates. The Third Estate was represented by its more prosperous and educated members. Peasants, artisans and women were denied entry to the assembly. However, Their grievances and demands were listed 40,000 letters which the representatives had brought with them. The members of the Third Estate demanded that voting now be conducted where each member would have one vote. When the king rejected this proposal, members of the Third Estate walked out of the assembly in protest. The Tennis Court Oath. The representatives of the Third Estate viewed themselves as spokesmen for the whole French nation. On the 20th of June they assembled in the hall of an indoor tennis court in the grounds of Versailles. They declared themselves a national assembly and swore not to disperse till they had drafted a constitution for France that would limit the powers of the monarch. They were led by Mirabeau and Abbé Sieyès. Mirabeau was born in a noble family but was convinced of the need to do away with a society of feudal privilege. Abbé Sieyès, who was originally a priest, wrote an influential pamphlet called What is the Third Estate? France during the drafting of the Constitution. While the National Assembly was busy at Versailles drafting a constitution, the rest of France seethed with turmoil. A severe winter had meant a bad harvest. After spending hours in long queues at the bakery, crowds of angry women stormed into the shops. At the same time, the king ordered troops to move into Paris. On the 14th of July, the agitated crowd stormed and destroyed the Bastille prison. Rumors spread that the lords of the manor who were on their way to destroy the ripe crops. Caught in a frenzy of fear, peasants in many districts seized hoes and pitchforks and attacked chateaux. Louis XVI agrees to the Third Estate's demands. Faced with the power of his revolting subjects, Louis XVI finally accorded recognition to the National Assembly and accepted the principle that his powers would from now on be checked by a constitution. On the night of the 4th of August 1789, the Assembly passed a decree abolishing the feudal system of obligations and taxes. Members of the clergy too were forced to give up their privileges. Tithes were abolished and lands owned by the church were confiscated. As a result, the government acquired assets worth at least 2 billion livres. France becomes a constitutional monarchy. The National Assembly completed the draft of the Constitution in 1791. Its main object was to limit the powers of the monarch. These powers, instead of being concentrated in the hands of one person, were now separated and assigned to different institutions: the legislature, executive and judiciary. This made France a constitutional monarchy. The Constitution of 1791 vested the power to make laws in the National Assembly, which was indirectly elected. That is, citizens voted for a group of electors, who in turn chose the Assembly. Not all citizens, however, had the right to vote. Only men above 25 years of age who paid taxes equal to at least 3 days of a laborer's wage were given the status of active citizens. That is, they were entitled to vote. The remaining men and all women were classed as passive citizens. To qualify as an elector and then as a member of the Assembly, a man had to belong to the highest group of taxpayers. The Constitution began with a declaration of the rights of man and citizen. Rights such as the right to life, freedom of speech, freedom of opinion, equality before law, were established as natural and inalienable rights. It was the duty of the state to protect each citizen's natural rights. France abolishes monarchy and becomes a republic. The situation in France continued to be tense during the following years. Rulers of other neighboring states made plans to send troops to put down the events that had been taking place since the summer of 1789. Before this could happen, the National Assembly voted in April 1792 to declare war against Prussia and Austria. Thousands of volunteers thronged from the provinces to join the army. Marseillaise was composed by Roger de Lisle. It was sung for the first time by volunteers from Marseille as they marched into Paris and so got its name. The Marseillaise is the national anthem of France. political clubs became an important place for people who were planning their own forms of action. The most successful of these clubs was the Jacobins. The Jacobins decided to start wearing long striped trousers. These Jacobins came to be known as the sans-culottes, literally meaning those without knee breeches. In the summer of 1792 the Jacobins planned an insurrection of a large number of Parisians who were angered by the short supplies and high prices of food. On the morning of August 10 they stormed the palace of the Tuileries and executed the king's guards. Then they held the king himself as hostage for several hours. Later the assembly nominated to imprison the royal family. The newly elected assembly was called the Convention. On the 21st of September 1792 it abolished the monarchy and declared France a republic. The king and queen were put to death in 1793 on account of treason. The Reign of Terror. It was the period from 1793 to 1794. Robespierre followed a policy of severe control. Enemies of the Republic were arrested or put to death by guillotine. He issued laws placing a maximum ceiling on wages and prices. Peasants had to sell their goods at fixed prices by the government. Use of expensive bread was forbidden. All had to eat equality bread. All men and women were referred to as citoyen and citoyenne. Churches were shut down and were converted to barracks and offices. Robespierre's supporters began to oppose him. He was executed in 1774. A Directory rules France. The fall of the Jacobin government allowed the wealthier middle classes to seize power. A new constitution was introduced which denied the vote to non-propertied sections of society. They also appointed a Directory, an executive made up of 5 members. However, the directors often clashed with the legislative councils, who then sought to dismiss them. The political instability of the Directory paved the way for the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte. Life of the women before the Revolution. Most women of the Third Estate had to work for a living. Most women did not have access to education or job training. Only daughters of wealthier members of nobility had studied. Working women had to look after their household. Women earned wages much lower than the men. Life of the women after the Revolution. The revolutionary government introduced certain laws to improve the lives of women. With the creation of state schools, schooling was made compulsory for all girls. Fathers could no longer force their daughters into marriage against their will. Divorce was made legal. Both men and women could apply for it. Women could now train for jobs, could run small businesses and become artists. The freedom of speech in everyday life. The years following 1789 in France saw many such changes in the lives of men, women and children. One important law that came into effect soon after the storming of the Bastille in the summer of 1789 was the abolition of censorship. In the old regime, all written material and cultural activities could be published only after they had been approved by the king. Now the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen proclaimed freedom of speech and expression to be a natural right. Newspapers, pamphlets, books and printed pictures flooded the towns of France. They all described and discussed the events and changes taking place in France. The legacy of the French Revolution. The ideas of liberty and democratic rights were the most important legacy of the French Revolution. These spread from France to the rest of Europe during the 19th century, where feudal systems were abolished. People reworked the idea of freedom from bondage into their movements to create a sovereign nation-state. Tipu Sultan and Ramo and Roy are 2 examples of individuals who responded to the ideas coming from revolutionary France.